Hello and welcome to the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra's concert season. I'm Katie Derham, here to tell you about some of the music that you're going to be hearing in this concert. In Northern Lights, we're going to take an emotional deep dive into the musical worlds of Scandinavia and the Baltics. We've got Grieg's ever-popular dramatic piano concerto, Sibelius's First Symphony with its hints of Tchaikovsky, and that's joined on the bill by the gorgeous and heartbreaking Musica Serena by Pēteris Vasks. Let's start with Musica Serena. The composer, Pēteris Vasks, was born just after the Second World War in Latvia. He trained in Lithuania as a double bassist and then moved on to composition, and he really is one of the great composers of the Baltic states. If you like the music of Arvo Pärt, you're going to love this. He writes beautifully, almost exclusively for strings, very atmospheric, poignant, really quite sorrowful music in the main. Mood music, I guess, but in the very best sense. In this piece, Musica Serena, he starts with whispering harmonics in the strings, and then it builds up to a really big emotional climax before returning then to something of a state of calm. I think there are nods to Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings in this piece, in the way it almost makes you hold your breath as you're listening to it. It's said that much of his music was written to reflect his despair at the political situation in his native Latvia. But I have to say, in this piece, which he wrote in the early part of this century, he actually wrote it as a 70th birthday gift for a Finnish conductor friend of his, so perhaps we shouldn't read too much into the music, but just let ourselves be immersed into it instead. After that heart-rending opening to the concert, we're really going to let rip with perhaps the most famous crashing sequence of chords out there, the opening to Grieg's piano concerto. It was his only concerto. He wrote it at the age of just 25 in 1868, and it had very famous fans. We're talking Anton Rubinstein, Liszt, even Rachmaninoff, who said it was the greatest concerto ever written. It has got famous cracking theme after cracking theme, and that is why you will have heard it pop up in all sorts of different films and TV shows, video games, and of course, famously, it was all the right notes, but not played necessarily in the right order by Morecambe and Wise in that famous scene featuring Andrei Previn. In the summer of 1868, the Griegs were quite newly married, they'd just had a little girl, and they'd rented a cottage just north of Copenhagen in Denmark. And so, full of young love, Edvard started to write. He had two main sources of inspiration for this work, the folk music of his native Norway and the piano concerto in A minor of Robert Schumann that he'd heard Clara Schumann perform when he was a student in Leipzig. So those two themes came together, if you like, and then this work was premiered in the April of 1869 in Copenhagen by the Danish pianist and composer Edmund Neupert. It was immediately a huge success, but it's said that Grieg was never completely satisfied with it, and he made upwards of 300 changes to it, fiddling with it over the next 40 years, although never to the main melodies which we know and love. It's a piece that seems to fascinate and delight pianists as well as audiences. As one soloist put it, there is steel behind the virtuosity. Yes, it's lyrical, it's sumptuous, but there's also some melancholy. There's a bit of grit there too. So those opening chords, introduced by a dramatic timpani roll, apparently some of the most nerve-wracking chords to play in the entire piano repertoire. After that, you must listen out for some related themes from the oboe and the clarinet. They, like the opening chords, will reappear in different guises throughout the concerto. The next big moment to listen out for in the first movement is an epic solo cadenza towards the end. Apparently it had the audience on its feet at the first performance. The Adagio, the second movement, has been called one of the most beautiful in the repertoire by a number of pianists whose opinions I respect. It's almost hymn-like in its serenity. It's then followed by the third movement with almost no break at all, and we're introduced to two Norwegian folk tunes. The first, a really athletic dance, and then a beautiful pastoral melody. The whole thing comes to a very satisfying conclusion and ends the piece, as it began, with a timp roll. So then we move from Latvia via Denmark and Norway to Finland and the work of perhaps the most significant symphonist of the 20th century, John Sibelius, a composer whose music helped define Finnish nationalism at a time when the country was struggling for independence against the Russian Empire. As a complete side note, one of my favourite facts about Sibelius is that despite having written most of his great works before 1930, he lived to a grand old age and didn't die until 1957, which means he will have heard rock and roll. He will have heard Elvis Presley. But I digress. Back to the First Symphony, which is the piece we're going to hear in this concert. Now, this wasn't the first major instrumental work that Sibelius had written. He'd actually left it reasonably late to attempt a symphony. He was 34, it was 1899, and he'd already written Finlandia. But a symphony? Well, he turned for inspiration to Tchaikovsky, and specifically to the Pēteris symphony that he'd heard played a couple of times live in Helsinki over the previous few years and had clearly had a major impact on him. And you really can hear the influence of Tchaikovsky in this work. His score is also annotated with the word Berlioz, ? Which is intriguing as a possible other source of inspiration. But to be honest with you, the main voice that you hear strongly in this piece is the unmistakable voice of John Sibelius, his first symphony and a great success right from the word go. In fact, one critic wrote at the premiere, "The greatest creation that has originated from Sibelius's pen," and another described it as a work full of unrestrained strength, full of passionate vivacity and astonishing audacity. Yes, this First Symphony is lush, it's romantic, it's got all that Tchaikovskyan feel to it. But don't forget, as time went on, the need for clear structure was very, very important to Sibelius, and you can hear that in this work as well. So the work opens with a rather dark and austere theme for solo clarinet, accompanied by rumbling timpani. This is a very good concert for the timps, I have to say. And then suddenly the strings come in a way that's been described as sunlight glinting off the snow. And we're off. Listen to the way the first climax dissolves into something completely new, with noble fanfares from the brass and playful conversation amongst the woodwind. It really is all going on. Then we have a lamenting second movement full of those Slavic influences of Tchaikovsky and maybe Borodin. I think even maybe the odd hint of a Scheherazade as well. See what you think and have a listen. This is followed by a wild Nordic dance in the scherzo, and then the finale, the Fantasia, which opens with that theme we first heard played by the clarinet right at the very beginning, but this time played by the strings. The final movement's climax comes with a majestically expansive melody, and do listen out for the way that theme is passed around the orchestra in such a wonderful way. It's all building up to lots of throbbing passion, but then right at the very end, we do return to the sort of Nordic chill with which the work started. So you are in for a lyrical treat with this concert, but never far from the surface, lurking underneath, is an undercurrent of melancholy and darkness. It is going to be emotional. I hope you enjoy it.